We're 3 weeks away from July 1, and I'm starting to have some clarity on the Maple Leafs' path forward. We'll discuss the latest on Tavares, Marner, and debate what inefficient contracts the Leafs may possess. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. What's happening, pal? How are you feeling on a Thursday?
Feeling pretty good. The summer grind, man. Just when you have a property.
You out back, you're doing some lawn mowing, some maintenance.
Mowing.
Spring cleaning.
Did some tree pruning.
Tree pruning. What does that even mean? I don't. What is tree pruning?
You're trying to get rid of the branches that are kind of overgrowing, things that are, try to make a shape nicely. Apparently, I didn't do as nice of a job, according to my mother. So my pruning skills need a little bit of work. I'm good at cutting stuff, but making it look nice-ish, still need to work on that, apparently.
Okay. All right. Interesting. I did not know this, but apparently you can. Well, I guess you do work with foliage on a daily basis here with the Locked On Leafs. But you like that? You like that?
And it was a maple leaf. It was a Chinese maple tree.
Oh, actually, I think my sister has one of those in her backyard as well. The new house they moved into happened to have one. Those are nice trees. Those are very nice trees. Speaking of trees and leaves, let's get into today's topic. We're going to talk about a couple of things. There's a few updates. It really almost feels like with a couple of days in between Game 3 and Game 4, felt like a lot of the insiders took it upon themselves to start doing a little more deep dive into what's going on elsewhere outside of the Stanley Cup Final. So, we got some LeBron rumblings piece. Chris Johnston wrote a piece. Myrtle was out here writing a bunch of stuff. There's a lot to get into of what's happening outside of the Stanley Cup Final. Finally, we are going to tee up Game 4 of the Cup Final later tonight, so we'll give our thoughts and opinions on that game. But there were some updates, and it was Maple Leafs related. Both Mitch Marner and John Tavares were written about this past week. Why don't we start with Tavares? Because I think that's kind of the more that's the one that I think a lot of people want to hear about more so, because it seemed as though something was going to happen with Tavares and the Maple Leafs. And according to Pierre LeBrun, does seem like it's quite close to happening as well. He said this in his recent piece, Dave. The Leafs and John Tavares camp continue to talk and touch base again this week. There remains mutual interest in getting something done, but finding that sweet spot on a fair deal isn't quite there yet. And he goes on to say, the idea that Tavares might sign for a bargain $5 million AAV seems like a stretch to me. That's interesting. We've talked about it before, right? And I thought the same thing when I saw that Brock Nelson contract come across the ticker. I thought there's no way now that the Leafs can even justify trying to sell John Tavares on a sweetheart deal with something in the fives. It's going to be more than that if Toronto wants to bring him back.
Yeah, it's really just like one of those things where I think Brad Living, when you talked about this, was alluding to it a bit, where it's like, we love the player, but there's another side to it, right? There's the business side to it. Because you have to also weigh what's out there, because we've talked about this.
There's nothing out there, though.
There's nothing out there. So John Tavares is like, well, I can do you a favor, but how much of a favor are you like? Especially, I think the big one has to be probably the stickler's the term. Right.
Yeah, I would imagine so. I would imagine that's kind of where it's at. Where although I don't know, because if the Leafs are willing to give him term, it'll be to buy it down. I don't think he's going to play out the full 6, 7, 8 years.
No, I don't think so.
Might play 5, 6 years, possibly. I suppose, But if he ends up signing 7-8, I don't think he'll play the rest out the rest of that contract. But there is the other side of the coin of this conversation that I feel like we don't necessarily talk about enough when we're talking about Tavares. Talking about it with Marner all the time, and it's that there are other teams that might be willing to pay this guy an arm and a leg to come into their franchise. Like, keep in mind, once before, reportedly, he had a 13 or $12.5 million deal on the table in San Jose when he decided to come to Toronto. So, there are teams out there, there are managers out there that believe that Tavares is still a great player. And based on the 38-goal season he just had, man, there might be a couple teams out there that believe that they are a Tavares away from being competitive. And, does John owe it to himself to maybe test the market as opposed to just coming back without even seeing what's out there? Because, dude, I don't know about you, but like Pierre LeBrun was on Overdrive today and I was listening and he was talking about how it seems like there's no sellers. Everyone's looking to buy, everyone's looking to get better, and everyone has cap space for the first time in pre-COVID era.
Yeah.
And if there's an abundance of cap space around the league, don't you just feel like they're going to throw it around like it's candy? Like there's going to be some stupid contracts that get thrown out there on July 1. And if you're going to throw out some money, I would probably consider John Tavares one of those targets because at least that he's a good hockey player. And, you throw 8-9 million at him. If the Leafs are only offering him 5, he might have to do what's best for him and his family and take that dough or at least see if that's out there.
Well, it's also like you have to consider there's that. I mean, I'm hearing so many conflicting things about this because someone said he's made his money and that's not the main motivation for him. And it's more so about his family situation and things like that. And then when you hear this, it's like, well, how much of a discount, right? Do you expect?
I think all things equal, like if we're talking a few 100,000, then yeah, for sure. Maybe he goes to Toronto, like 5 million as opposed to 5.5. But like, there's got to be a number out there where Tavares is like, I'm sorry, I just simply can't turn this offer down. Yeah. Like if someone offers him 8.5, and it's Toronto's only offering 5.5, and we're talking about a $3 million AAV, maybe it's a multi-year deal. Like we're talking, let's say that's a 5-year contract at an extra $3 million per season. That's an extra 15 sheets that we're talking here. $15 million.
And what if it's from a no-tax state?
Yeah, if that's the case, it's a heck of a lot more than that, right? Like if Dallas swoops in and tries to pick him up, or Vegas,
Seattle.
A second line, Seattle, who might want to bring in a good veteran, right? Like I get it, Tavares, he hasn't won yet, so maybe he's not necessarily chasing the bag like he would be chasing a ring, and perhaps he wants to do it in the city of Toronto. I'm not saying that he it's not going to be a consideration to come back to Toronto. But I almost feel like he owes it to himself to almost test the market at this point. And if the Maple Leafs are not willing to give him a fair market value right off the hop, I would if I were John. I feel like that doesn't get talked about enough. What should John do? You know what I mean?
And one thing I'll tell you too is look at who the agent is. Pierre LeBrun's very plugged in with Pat Brisson on a lot of things. So like if you're looking at like guys that he has worked contracts with, like Sidney Crosby, like he did the sweetheart deal. Like Sidney Crosby done that. Maybe Sidney Crosby would give his agent a little bit of a, did we make the right decision here with that?
With the second, yeah, you're right. With the second extension he made last year,
right. There's a bit of that. Like Jonathan Marchessault got himself a pretty good deal in Nashville. Like Patrick Kane, Pat Brisson's, go find yourself and another with Detroit and things like I think what Pat Brisson understands. That there is a market for, a lot of his players out there. But like Tavares, he's in an interesting spot because, like I'd like to think that staying in Toronto is his number one priority. He seemed to be excited about that. But it could also be to a point where it's like the guy gave up the captaincy.
Right.
He's
probably going to get pushed out to the wing, which wherever he goes, that might happen eventually anyway. But certainly here in Toronto in the next year or two, it's likely.
It's a matter of I think I don't think he's asking for what he'd be asking for is outrageous because of the season that he if he had a down season, then I could say it. But the guy had 38 goals. He almost had 40 goals.
That's the thing. And he put up another 5 in the playoffs, second on the team in scoring behind Willie in the postseason, tied with Nyes. It really is a conundrum that the Maple Leafs find themselves in because everyone wants change and believes we need change. And I'm on that boat too. I think there needs to be change. But the problem is the players that are walking out the door are pretty darn good players, and they're just very difficult to replace. And there's no easy replacements for them. So it almost sounds dumb to change things just for the sake of changing things. And, last offseason, we did hear Tree Living say that he wasn't going to change for the sake of change. But it almost feels like maybe after a year, 2 years now with the club, it seems like he's kind of softening on that, doesn't it?
Yeah, you kind of hope so in a way.
Feels like it.
It just feels like that's kind of that's kind of the path it could be leaning on. But I don't know. It the Leafs really had to be careful here because you're in a position the Leafs are not in a position where they can take a step back. They need to be, and that's why they got to be you want to move forward, but you also have
to what? Put a pin on this for a second. Actually, I want to take a break and come back because there is pushback to that sentiment, and I think we could have that conversation of whether or not the Leafs could, should, or will do that this season. So why don't we come back? We'll have that conversation. We'll possibly talk about some inefficient contracts that the Maple Leafs have. And Game 4, the Stanley Cup Final tonight, Oilers-Panthers. Can Edmonton get it back on the rails after getting pumped in Game 3? We'll tee that up later on as well. It's Mike DiStefano with Dave Morassutti, listening to the Locked On at Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
Today's edition of Locked On Leafs podcast is brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. I'm a big fan of the no-shell variety. It's a great grab-and-go snack, or it's a great thing to have if you're working at your desk. You just need a quick protein boost. But if you're a fan of the in-shell options, they are a classic favorite and provide that satisfying crunch. And, you can also look at the different flavors that Wonderful Pistachio has. Sea salt. If you're someone who doesn't even like salt at all, they do have unsalted. Or if you just want a little bit of salt, they also have lightly salted. Get snackin and crackin with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more.
The Locked On Leafs podcast continues. Mike DiStefano, Dave Morassutti with you here on the show. Just a reminder that the Locked On Leafs podcast is a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast, and you can find it wherever you get your podcasts all off season long. We are here each and every day, Monday through Friday, with brand new episodes, free and available wherever you get a podcast, and also up on YouTube. If you enjoy the content, we ask that you would please subscribe. We're still on the road to 10K. Road to 10,000 subscribers on YouTube, and we'll be giving away a Toronto Maple Leafs jersey. That's our goal through the summer. So try and get there for the start of the season. We can get one lucky Locked On Leafs listener, Leafs fan, a brand new Leafs jersey. All right. You had just kind of posed the question, or you were wondering aloud, whether or not the Maple Leafs could afford to take a step back this year. And I want you to elaborate a little bit more on that. And I want to pause because I wanted to have more of a conversation on it. So I knew we were pumping up against the time there. So pick up on your thought there about, why you think maybe the Leafs can't afford to take a step back. There are some people that do believe that that could be a possibility this year, but I'll touch on that after you talk.
The big one here is like they're in a position where they don't have a lot of assets, right? They're not like if they have a not so great year, they don't have a first round pick, right? Like they don't have the draft, like a lot of draft capital. They don't have guys, a lot of contracts that you can say, okay, we can trade this guy, trade this guy, trade this guy, and recoup some assets, right? They're not in that, like they're not in a position like I'm trying to think, like they're not like the Rangers where they do have some guys that they can move that have a bit of like
value,
right? Like they don't. Yeah, the Leafs have some players that other teams would be interested, but they're going to be players that the Leafs probably don't want to move, right? Like Matthew Knies is probably one of those guys that every team will call for if the Leafs would ever in that position of trying to sell. Like that to me is the issues. Like the Leafs aren't in a position to say, oh, we can go sell this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy. There's a lot of no trade clause. Like, okay, certain no trade clause you can move. No movement clauses, yes, you can technically move them. But as we see, if the player doesn't want to move it, you're stuck.
Well, unless you're the Rangers, then you just say, hey, Trouba, hey, Kreider, you're going to Anaheim no matter what. And that's a possibility. You could do that. But I see what you're saying. Here's where I would kind of claw back on that. I think it's a worthwhile point you make, the fact that they don't have a draft pick. But like when you look at this roster, like let's say Tavares leaves, Marner leaves, and they're not able to sign a prize free agent or make a big trade to replace these guys. And they kind of go in, like maybe they make a middling addition to, in free agency. It's not they're not going to add at all, but, they don't go out and get one of the star players, right? Like maybe they settle for one of the middling free agents. I'm just pulling up the, TSN just put out their top 50 list actually today. So if you look at it, like there's a bunch of guys who are available, obviously. But let's say they go out and they sign, I don't know. I'm trying to find like a Brandon Saad type of player. I don't know. I was literally just the most random person, or a Yoel Armia type of guy, or maybe you can get yourself a Dadonov. But you're striking out on the Marchands, the Bennetts, the Brock Bessers, like the star players that might make a difference. Patrick Kane and Ehlers, right? Maybe you're looking at Ryan Donato instead, or Mikhail Granlund. Like those would be downgrades for the team. But if you look at it, like if Marner and Tavares both walk, do you still see them as a playoff team? Like
if they both walk and the Leafs don't really add, yeah, I could say that the Leafs would be, they still be a playoff team, but they wouldn't be an overwhelming like division favorite, right? It would be taking a step back, right? Because yes, you still have Matthews, you still have Nylander, you would have Knies, right?
Yeah.
But you don't necessarily have the elite top six that has allowed to carry the rest of the team.
Yet. You don't have those yet. And that's where I think the step back makes a little bit of sense in this is what I mean by that. I'll get into it a little more, but if the Maple Leafs take a step back this year, right? They let those two walk and they don't fill those roles with big money long-term deals, and they keep that money and then assess where things are at after this year, right? You see where things are at, and then not only is the cap going up again, but you didn't spend it the year before. So it's still there, and you'll have a lot of money to spend. Go all out in 2026, where there is a massive heap of talented free agents in 2026, possibly one of the best free agent classes out there, like Connor McDavid, Kyle Connor, Jack Eichel, Panarin will be coming back up. Martin Nakash will be up there. Adrian Kempe, Alex Tuck, Kirill Kaprizov. Like these are some star players. Connor Garland, Jaden Schwartz, Mason Marchman ends up back into the stratosphere there. Like there's a lot of players that you could go out. Now, obviously, not all of them are going to make it to free agency. There's an entire season to go for these teams to sign these players. But if you're looking ahead, you're thinking to yourself, if we just take a step back here and we maybe regroup, retool, we keep assets instead of trying to go for it, trade more assets, like trading Easton Cowan just to be a middling team again.
Yeah.
Instead of doing that, we take a step back. We still might be able to compete for a playoff spot. We probably will still make the playoffs with the group that they have, I would think. Or at least they'll be able to compete for a playoff spot at the very least. Still very good defensively, great goaltending. You still have Austin Matthews. Matthew Nyes hopefully takes a step. You still got William Nylander. There's still good pieces on this team, even if Marner and Tavares walk. Good enough where they may not win the division or compete for a cup, but they could still make the playoffs. So the draft pick won't really matter. But then you'll have a boatload of cap space for the following season to load up and go and get somebody big if they end up making it to market. Because that doesn't seem to be the big guy is Marner this year. Like, that's the big guy. And if you're letting him go, you're not going to go after him in free agency. The replacement isn't there this year, via trade or via free agent, but it could be next year. So I think there's some merit to the step back season for the Maple Leafs. It's tough to talk about because you don't want to waste a year of Austin Matthews and a year of William Nylander, especially Matthews, where it's there's 3 years left of that deal. So you've got 3 years. You're going to waste a third of it, 33% of it. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but there's some merit to that conversation.
There is. And this is why they're probably more interested in going after like the Jonathan Taves like players, the guys who, like Jonathan Taves, he'll have, I think what I heard, LeBron reported that like Taves has 3 or 4 teams that they're going to be narrowing down in terms of the interest. Like they're not going to go and say, hey, whoever wants to get in. Like they're going to be very selective in that process. I'm assuming the Leafs would probably be hopefully among those teams.
Yeah,
right? Among those teams, right? So like you can go out and get a player, see if you can get a player like Jonathan Taves. And I think this is why, even if you go out and bring back John Tavares, I don't think it changes that idea of 2026 that much because,
well, it depends. What are you bringing him back at? I think if you bring him back at 5, no, I don't think it changes things. But if you bring him back at 8, it's slightly different.
Yeah,
I believe.
I think that's probably where the Leafs are trying to tell Tavares, like, look, we understand it's tough to ask for you to do that, but we also view this as an opportunity for us to finally do what the Floridas have done and really build out that depth. So we're not asking as much out of you because we're not expecting as much out of you by paying you less, right?
Well,
like
you're still going to want 30 plus goals out of him.
You're still going to want decent production, but we're not going to ask him to be scoring 40 points, right? Like understanding that if you use the money that would have been paid to Tavares, even like the extra $3 million, right? You're saying it can be spent on some of the other guys.
Totally.
But you also have to be careful, as we said, on how much you're going to spend that extra money on and how much term. Let's not go the Nick Ritchie, Andre Kasha, Peter Mrazek route either with that money.
No. Ideally, you find someone who actually makes who can make a difference. Like maybe bring a Connor Brown back into the fold if he somehow escapes Edmonton. That could be an option. Bring him back to Toronto. Maybe you throw a little dice throw on Andrew Mangiapane, who's a GTA kid, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and had a down year with Washington, but hey, he had a couple good years with Brad Treliving. He's quickly actually becoming one of my targets, by the way. And I know we got some time. We got a few weeks where we get into our free agent targets, but in terms of like dark horse candidates, I like Andrew Mangiapane a lot, and it's mainly because of the Treliving Mangiapane connection from their Calgary days. His best season was back then, so that's a name to keep an eye on. By the way, for me at least, when it comes to a middle six, possible. I don't call him an impact ad, but good depth piece. Certainly a good depth piece for this team. All right, Dave, let's take another break. Let's come back. Let's chat about some of the inefficient contracts that the Maple Leafs have, and we'll tee up Game 4 tonight. Oilers, Panthers. Can the Panthers take a stranglehold 3-1 lead on Edmonton? We'll get to that and more next here on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. The Locked On at Leafs podcast continues. Mike DiStefano and Dave Morassutti with you as always. The Maple Leafs, as it currently stands, you take a look at their Puckpedia page, they currently have $25.7 million in cap space right now. They have $69.7 million used up already with guys who are already signed. Not even at the floor yet, actually. They still got to make some signings to even get to the cap floor. Keep in mind the cap limit moving up to $95.5 million this year. So the Leafs got a long ways to get there, and $25.7 million to go. And again, they've got some UFAs and RFAs that they'll probably look to get done. Matthew Nyes is one of those guys. We expect for him to get a nice, handsome contract. We'll see what they end up doing with Tavares and Marner. I think Lorentz is someone, and Pacioretty, another player who both UFAs that the Leafs might try to bring back as some depth roles. But there are still some inefficient contracts remaining within this Maple Leafs team. Now, it's not as bad as it used to be. 4 years ago, they used to have some awful contracts that they had to, attach assets to move out. And, it's a big reason why they lost some pieces. Why is Seth Jarvis a Carolina Hurricane instead of Toronto Maple Leaf? Well, because they signed Patrick Marleau to an inefficient, awful contract. And in order for Carolina to take on that money so that they could get some cap space, they had to give up that draft pick that turned out to be Seth Jarvis. So the Leafs are not in that bad of shape like they used to be, but there still are some inefficient contracts that the Leafs might look to get out of. Which contracts to you, or which players to you kind of fit that bill right now?
Well, David Campbell's one.
Yeah, he's got 2 more years left on his deal at $2.4 million. Yeah.
Right.
He's sitting in the press box.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, I love the guy. I love the passion he brings, but we've had issues with Max Domi this season. At 3.75, he can't be a middling third line player. I know he was miscasted as a center, as a third line matchup center. They got to figure that one out.
I'm willing to give Max one more kick at the can here.
I am too.
I think he definitely has to produce. What do he have? 5-6 goals this year? That clearly he needs to score more. I'm not saying he needs to be a 20, 25, 30 goal scorer.
8 goals this year, by the way.
8 goals. All right, let's bump that up to 15. Let's bump that up to 15 goals and 35 assists. Let's get this guy up to 50 points on the year, 45, 50 points. And I think we'd be happy with that. And I think that it's possible, again, if they don't make big-time additions in free agency, you do see Max Domi move up into the top 6 possibly, and I think that's where you'll see he'll be more so worth that money because I think the production will come with it. So I'm not quite ready to move off of Domi or call it a bad contract quite yet. However, if he ends up being in the bottom 6 again, then there's the conversation where that money, that role just doesn't fit for him. So top 6, Domi, I think that it's worthwhile. If he's in the bottom 6, it's inefficient.
That's kind of where I'm at. If you're not going to use him to his strengths, you're going to get those results. He had 3 goals in the playoffs. He almost had half the goals in the playoffs than he did all year in the regular season. Eventually he figured it out, but I think it's also you need to understand that he's a skilled player. Skilled players should be playing more in the top 6 than in the bottom 6.
Agreed.
In my opinion.
Agreed. Ryan Reeves, another inefficient contract. The day the contract was signed, I've been shaking my head since that one. $1.35 million. It's variable though, so at the very least, it doesn't necessarily have to count against the cap. But it's why did you have to give him that 3rd year? Why did you have to give him that 3rd year? Nobody was giving Ryan Reeves 3 years. Why Toronto? It just made no sense when they made it happen and when they did it. And they're for a 2nd straight year gonna have to pay this guy it's a very minuscule cap hit. You bury him, you're still gonna have what I think it's $100,000 at that point on the books. But it's just like why? Why did you have to do that? Very inefficient contract by True Living.
It is, and it was just one of those signings where he wanted a DNA type player, but overpaid for it, and just the guy's too old, right?
Yeah,
Like he's gonna be 38 this year, and I understand. Like we can't like. There's a difference between a 38-year-old Ryan Reeves and a 40-year-old Corey Perry, right? Like you can have older players on your team, but you need to understand that certain guys in the roles that they play work better than others. And Ryan Reeves was one of those guys where they wanted him to be the fourth line guy that comes in and keeps keep the flies off the stars.
Yeah.
Which he never really did. And like he would fight some of the enforcers on the other teams, but it didn't change when, a guy like Timothy Liljegren gets taken out by Brad Marchand, and Marchand just happy going about it. Like to me, those were like, that's where I really started to turn. It's like, why are you here?
Yeah.
Right. So I'm glad that they finally realized that and put him on waivers, and I'm expecting it to be more of the same again.
Yeah, I would think that ends up being the case as well. Callie Yarncroc, we kind of had that conversation yesterday at $2.1 million. Yeah, it's a bit of an inefficient contract, I guess. Like I appreciate what he can bring to this team when he's healthy, but that's kind of that's the if, right? That's the problem, is he hasn't necessarily been healthy over his tenure here in Toronto. So I guess that would also kind of qualify $2.1 million this upcoming season as a bit of an inefficient contract.
Yeah, it's just Daryl Sutter was on Alberga's show, and he kind of said like the fourth line needed a little more jam. Like he's like, again, they were decent players, but there was an element missing on that fourth line. And to me, that's why like Callie Yarncroc's not a fourth line player. He's, he was at his best when he was either on the third line, or if you needed someone to bump up in the top six just to give a bit of support for Matthews and Marner, that's where he was at his best.
Which again, you go into a situation where you don't replace Marner. Like he's a guy. It's not ideal, but he's a guy who has had success with Austin Matthews in the past. Maybe you bump him up, Callie Yarncroc, and you give him an opportunity in your top six. Again, it's not ideal. It's not going to be a sexy decision, but he at least has that flexibility to move up and down your lineup. Any other contracts you would deem inefficient for the Maple Leafs?
This one was brought up yesterday, where you looked at the Florida Panthers and their third pairing cost them $2 million. Then you look at the Leafs fourth pairing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oliver Ekman-Larsson's name was brought up just because you've got him as your third pairing defenseman, also playing on his offside because it didn't work with Yanni Hakanpää. Philip Myers, he was better than Philip Myers, obviously. So, like, is it worth having that guy as your third pairing left shot or third pairing defenseman? Which I'm okay. I was okay with that, but it's one of those things where could you find someone at a better cost than what Oliver Ekman-Larsson is providing you?
I mean, probably, but I don't have a problem with what OEL brought. I think he earned every bit of that $3.5 million this year. So I'd have a hard time calling that inefficient. As long as you earn your money, I think it's a worthwhile contract, and I think OEL did for the most part.
I think the big one here is, that if something were to happen to one of your top four guys, OEL gets bumped up. Yeah, right?
Exactly.
It's more so he is a...
And let's be honest, like Nate Schmidt, okay? Nate Schmidt's getting money from previous buyouts. That's why he signed to such a cheap deal in Florida. Like, he should be a $3 million player. He was making, I think, 5.5 when he signed that contract with Winnipeg or Vancouver. I don't remember which one he signed. He was with both teams, making 5.5. I think it was with Vancouver, actually.
I think it was Vancouver. Then he got traded to Winnipeg, and then Winnipeg bought him out or something like that.
Yeah, so like he was a $5.5 million player. So like you've got that guy playing on your third pair. So it's it's a little tongue in cheek to look at it and be like, well, they only spend $2 million. It's like, yeah, technically they do, but like that's only because Schmidt's playing at an absolute sweetheart contract. So it's a little bit of a stretch there. Morgan Riley, though, is definitely a worthwhile conversation.
Yeah.
You talk about inefficient contracts, and I said OEL, I thought he made his money, so I didn't deem it that. Did Morgan Riley earn his $7.5 million this year, Dave? And will he for the next 5 years?
So I think, well, saw a reduction in ice time and wasn't playing on the top power play. Yeah. Doesn't play on the penalty kill either. He's not one of the top guys you put out there. I think this was one of those seasons where the Leafs have to decide, was it a bad season for Morgan Riley that he can bounce back from, and you hope maybe with Brandon Carlo in the mix that maybe it'll work better, or is this the start of the decline, right? Almost kind of, well, it's not the same situation because Chris Letang's dealing with injuries, but like one of those where the team has gone out of their way to reduce the guy's role without really telling him they're reducing his role, and the production is just not there we've always said Morgan Riley miscasted as a number one, true elite number one defenseman, just because he's not a shutdown guy and he's not providing that elite production that he was a few years ago. Like if he's giving you 60 plus points, even 55 plus points, I would be more comfortable with that, but he's not doing that.
Yeah.
I will say though, he was better in the playoffs offensively, but I needed to see more out of him than what we got. Like I still think that defensively there's areas where it just felt like he was just not the same player. He kind of looked, I'm trying to find the right word for it, pedestrian. I think would be kind of like he didn't have a lot of jam to his game. He didn't have like he wasn't really pushing the pace, right? He's not breaking out the puck like we've normally see him do. He's not doing those things that you pay him to do. Let's just say.
Yeah, well, I'm with you. It's definitely an interesting situation the Maple Leafs find themselves in when it comes to Morgan Riley. I'm sure if he didn't have a no trade clause or a no move clause, I would think that the Maple Leafs would probably be thinking long and hard about seeing if they could get away from that contract and try and find someone who would want to take on that type of deal. Because for the Maple Leafs, it doesn't seem to work. And, he might need a change of scenery or find a partner that works a little better. Like Brandon Carlo, I guess he came in and I think did stabilize things a little bit, but Riley's only getting older. So we'll see, how the next season goes, a full year with Carlo as his partner. All right, really quickly, Dave, game 4 of the Cup Final tonight. Does Edmonton keep lockstep here with Florida and tie things up, or you think the Panthers continue to dominate here and take a 3-1 seriously? What's your prediction?
Yeah, I think the big one here is, can they stay disciplined? Because that was brutal. Like, you cannot be...
11 power plays. You gave Florida 11 power plays.
And I think they scored on 3 of them.
Yeah, 3 for 11. Yeah.
It's just, it felt like they lost their composure, and their top guys have to step it up now because they're being beat by Sam Bennett and Brad Marchand. Not bad players, but you should not be losing. They're not losing to Barkov. They're not losing to Kachuk. They're losing to Marchand and Bennett. It's not a good look for McDavid and Draisaitl, in my opinion.
No, but those two are going to get paid this summer. That I am very much aware of. Maybe one of them will end up in Toronto. Who knows? We shall see. I think Edmonton gets it back. I do. They're like 18-2 in games 4 through 7. Stuart Skinner's a game 4 god. Like statistically, it turns into Dom Hasek in game 4. I'm not quite sure why that's the case because he had like a 955 save percentage in game 4s in his career, 6-0. So I think he bounces back in a big way, and I think the Oilers can kind of get a victory and just kind of limp out of there with a split. And hopefully they get back on home ice in game 5 to try and wrestle back that advantage. So I'm predicting a 4-1 Edmonton Oilers victory tonight.
I think this one goes to overtime, 4-3 Edmonton.
All right, we'll see. We'll see what happens. All right, that'll do it for us here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On at Leafs podcast on all platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow the show at Locked On Leafs as well. And Dave at D_Morassutti. We'll be back with another episode for you guys. Actually, you'll be back with an episode tomorrow. And on Monday, I'll be back on the show on Tuesday. So you got Dave for the next couple episodes, but he'll be back tomorrow. Until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.